O R Tambo would have turned 100 years today had he lived, and this marks his centenary. President Jacob Zuma visited the icon's birthplace in the Eastern Cape. And speaking on the occasion, President Zuma says that Tambo spent most of his years uplifting and empowering people of South Africa. He hailed Tambo for having imported traits of leadership skills such as resilience and persistence.
The longest serving president of the African National Congress. OR, as he was fondly known by his comrades, would have turned 100 years old today had he lived. Today is the culmination of a year long of celebrations. His leadership ensured that the international community, and more importantly, the Organization of African Unity and the frontline states remained steadfast behind the vision of the ANC in those talks in the form of the Harare Declaration. He lived for one mission only: to see South Africa free, to see her people united and building an equal, prosperous society with no poverty or inequality. We visited Lusaka in Zambia, where President Kenneth Kaunda and the Zambian people gave us shelter and solidarity for 30 years during our struggle.
And government dedicated the past year as the year of O R Tambo to commemorate the life and struggle of the former ANC president. But the question is, are today's ANC leaders living up to the values and principles espoused by O R Tambo, or are they just paying lip service? And joining us on the phone line, Thabo Motle, ANC Youth League NEC member, and we have Carl Niehaus, MKMVA NEC member, live in Durban. Nomazotyo Memane, advocate and director of Asmamba Neni, member of the ANC Youth League, Women's League, I beg your pardon, and Sfiso Mahlango, group political editor, joins us in studio. Good evening to you, and thanks so much. Mr. Motle, let's start with you, though. In comparison, and it is also unfair to compare leaders based on their generational mandate and the circumstances, to try and say, is there another O R Tambo in our midst?
Yeah, thanks, Cindy. Firstly, let me indicate I am not even worthy or coming very close to the qualities or that were portrayed by O R Tambo. Neither am I worthy to speak about the leader of his caliber. But it is practically impossible to assume what would have OR done under the circumstances that the ANC find itself in, because we know he was a visionary. He made references to what will happen, and we are seeing what he envisaged that will happen is happening, when he said, I paraphrase, that this organization will encounter challenges. When he was addressing comrades who were complaining by then that the struggle that they were waging of liberation was a difficult struggle, he said, wait and see until the ANC is in power, and you will see how difficult the struggle of saving and being in the position of power will be. Hence, what we are witnessing today, we draw wisdom from what O R Tambo has said. But I think it will be unfortunate for us to begin to assume to say if O R Tambo was alive, he could have done this and that. But the emphasis is that we need to, from time to time, emulate his leadership, because his leadership was the one that kept the ANC together for a very long time under those conditions and circumstances that his leadership and the ANC was confronted with.
Tambo, please just stay on the line. Through the eye of the needle, kind of pragmatic leadership qualities and attributes that the ANC talks about today, in reference to what O R Tambo had stood for. Of course, the battle is different now for the ANC and the larger majority of South Africans, but being instrumental in at least directing and affecting meaningful change by attacking the illegal apartheid state. That's one of his legacies, but also primarily about humility, the ability to bring people together, albeit under different ideologies.
Well, I think it's so interesting that we as South Africans often say, if OR was alive, this is what he'd do. You know, if Chris Hani was alive, this is what he'd say. If Steve Biko were alive, this is what would happen. And that's so unfair because you don't know what a person would have been, what he would have said, what he would have become. The reality is that our leaders have passed. It is for South Africa to take the baton forward. In the spirit of Oliver Tambo, as his son Dali was speaking earlier, it was not an easy tenure. He did not have an easy presidency. You know, there were times when Oliver Tambo had to fire people from the ANC. There were times when he had to move people in serious and strategic positions, what we would consider a cabinet reshuffle today. And he did it living in another country, almost controlling the internal politics of South Africa from another country. And when he made his final statement, he said, this ANC I give you is a united ANC and not in tatters. So you get to understand that it was not the smooth sail ship. When people want to throw shade on the ANC of today, they say, well, you see, the ANC of today is broken and it has factions. The ANC of Jacob Zuma is broken, but the ANC of Oliver Tambo was united and spotless, and that is not true. Politics can never be smooth and spotless. The presidency of Oliver Tambo was challenged many times, but I think what we learn from him is that he rose beyond and above those challenges and continued to rule. I like the rendition of Oliver Tambo to say when he made his final statement, he did not want to hang on to power and cling to power, but he handed over a man who built the ANC with many others, but trusted it enough to say, I even hand it over to you, Mandela. It is not mine, but it is yours. And I think it's a monumental moment for South Africans to remember the man that OR was. Yeah,
but remember, in a balanced way, as you highlighted, that we all fall from glory, if you will, because of the fickle nature of being human. Advocate Memane, do you think that is necessary to have to reflect on the weaknesses of the leader, how they overcome their own adversities, as opposed to just glorifying them almost in a shrine kind of fashion?
Yes, I think it is necessary to reflect into the leaders of any leader who's in a position. But then we must also bear in mind that, you know, when O R Tambo was the president of the ANC and the leader of the ANC, it was at a different time. And then the money was not the key issue at that point in time, because Oliver Tambo had to take care of millions and millions of South Africans who have left the country and then were in exile. And then he had to make a point that he built the ANC and the ANC government in exile. He made a point that he continue the sanctions against apartheid South Africa. He had a massive role compared to just a government, because it was those people who were in exile that he was taken care of. And then he was also going around campaigning for ANC and also campaigning against the apartheid South Africa. And at the same time, he also kept intact with the South African leaders who were within the country to make a point that the organization and there's a spearheading of politics, of ANC politics in the country. I mean, he was the greatest leader, and I'm always saying, I wonder why this country has not dedicated at least 2 days for Oliver Tambo maybe a weekend for Oliver Tambo because of the role that he has played.
Well, and Mr. Mutle, just coming to the role in terms of ensuring that internationally the call for a free South Africa and a liberation of its people was top of mind and topical around the world. Do you think that leaders today emulate that? And primarily, if you look at the insile and exile debate on who has greater authority over how the ANC should be run, or who knows it best?
The material conditions have changed, but we all know that OR played a very significant role in terms of running the campaign, mobilizing the world behind to play solidarity against the regime by then. But you look at today, the battle today, it is no longer about freeing our people. Now, even in some countries internationally are playing a role of reversing those gains that Oliver Tambo has made to ensure that the ANC leads the majority of the people who voted it into power because of the economic factor that they have interest on. Now, we see that some of the countries are playing a role in ensuring that the ANC is being removed from power. So it's quite a difficult or a complex economical issue to deal with as compared to what O.R. Tambo had to mobilize the international world for. But obviously it tells us that some who supported us had ulterior motives. So that they had ulterior motives that when the ANC gets into power, they are going to amass the wealth of this country. When the ANC take a particular direction, they are not happy with that particular direction. But we know that what will keep the ANC strong, and it's what President Mandela once said in Kwabe conference, that the unity, the African National Congress is built upon unity. Now, even the likes of Prickly Guy Sagasema, when they founded the African National Congress, they also made mention of unity. Therefore, it is very much important. We say it from time to time that the unity...
Remutle, I just want to give, I beg your pardon, I just want to give Carl Niehaus an opportunity. He's been waiting on the phone line for quite a while. We appreciate your patience, Carl. How do we commemorate the life and times of the leaders such as O R Tambo beyond the symbolism of naming key points like the airport and street names, and if leaders are actually carrying the virtues in their conduct today?
Well, Cindy, I think the most important lesson that we can learn from Comrade O R Tambo is what he said when he said that liberation in South Africa will be inconceivable if there's not a return of the wealth of the country to the majority of the people. And that is the critical issue that we're faced with now. And it is incredible that Comrade O.R. so clearly saw that this challenge was going to come our way during our period of full democracy in South Africa. So for us, if we want to really keep the legacy of Comrade O.R. alive, we have to work for a unity that is a principled unity. And a principled unity in this instance will be one where we unite around the understanding that we need to bring about radical economic transformation in our country, and that we have to implement the second phase of the national liberation struggle. Comrade O.R. stated it so clearly, and he always emphasized that justice in South Africa will not just come through the democratic vote, important as it is, but ultimately it will come through economic justice. So I hope that all of us in the African National Congress will find a way to unite around the liberation of our people economically, and that this upcoming conference, our national elective conference now in December, will take clear resolutions for the implementation of radical economic transformation. If we do that, that will be the best possible way in which we can serve the legacy of Comrade OR and the messages that he gave us through his own admonitions to us to make sure that liberation will be a full liberation, which includes economic liberation to the majority of South Africans and especially Africans.
Mr. Mahlangu, is he, O R Tambo, the silver lining in what we've seen in the ANC's factions and the most, I suppose, worst bloodbath in the contestation to the presidency? Is he the silver lining?
I often, want to talk about the unity that O R Tambo represented. But I also want to be frank to say, even in O R Tambo's day and even in his presidency, there were factions. There's always factions in every political party, even in the ANC. In the ANC of John Langalbalele Dube, in the ANC of Chaka Mahabane Mtimunye, there were factions, as there are factions today. But I think it's also important to highlight that the challenges of the longest-serving president of the ANC, Mr. O R Tambo, has different challenges to those that we see today. If you look at the economic inequalities that this country presents, and O R Tambo was sort of a transition president to say, well, I've handed over the freedom. It is the current ANC that must take the vertical freedom, the ability to vote, and translate it into the latter freedom of economic liberation. And he was that sort of president. But the challenges are very significant and very different from his day. Perhaps if OR were alive today, we'd see similar scenes playing out, because we live in a country that has the majority of its population still suffering, and the minority are clinging on to that economy, refusing to let it go. In fact, I don't think any other president who's perhaps not captured by white monopoly capital. In essence, I mean, a capitalist state is inherently a captured state anyway. I don't know if things would be different. What OR did was bring the ability for us to vote. It is the ANC of today that must translate that into economic liberation.
Of course, and there are celebrations across the country and marking the centenary of O R Tambo. We're going to have to thank our guests for this special broadcast.